20 years in healthcare. I've worked across large corporates. I've had 2 startups of my own, exited them. I've helped venture capital firms with their investment thesis. And now in the UK, I work with a couple of venture capital firms.
That's Vandana. She's an expert in the health tech space.
My first startup was in oncology therapeutics, and the second one was in AI predictive in cancer. So Axel Partners obviously is one of the most respected, regarded VCs in the world. I actually got my funding of a bunch of presentations, 63 versions. It was about across 2 rounds, 10 million. They really sort of put me through the ringer on what it was.
She goes in depth on health tech exits.
Healthcare, health tech, biotech sort of stuff. You're looking at strategic exits. You're looking at it. Could it be a hospital chain? Could it be a pharmaceutical company? With healthcare, I think exits come much sooner than you can expect. Of course, you can always build your product out to an IPO, and that's fantastic. But you always have the option of looking at, let's say, a Series B, can I exit out?
She's now shifted to the investor and advisor side.
For startups, I think you need to be very close to innovation, and that's always been a theme across the work that I've been doing. Sort of helps you rapidly get to market. I've actually helped startups raise up to about $160 million when they flip from India to the US.
So you do so many different things, and you came with a strong recommendation from Shamik, who's our health tech lead. Can you explain for us and for me, what do you do today?
A whole bunch of things, like you said. So 20 years in healthcare. I've worked across large corporates. I've had 2 startups of my own, exited them. I've helped venture capital firms, with their investment thesis. And now in the UK, I work with a couple of venture capital firms. Very passionate about healthcare investing, especially looking at very overlooked sort of sectors as well that need attention. And also trying to build a fund with very specific thesis points that I'm passionate about. So that's a bit of all that I do.
So I just said, you started in corporate, right? And then you went into your own startups.
Yeah.
Can you rewind that bit about how did you make that transition and what made you start your first company?
So I think it was a very interesting phase, right? I think the large corporates really gave me, and again, these are very global roles. I was working in the US, Europe, as well as Asia Pacific. And what the large companies gave me were a lot of discipline and the sort of the network across the clinical ecosystems, the regulatory frameworks, partnerships. And I think, when India was sort of is where I sort of did my startups, and we had the healthcare biotech boom just touching it then back in 2012, and it was the right stage where healthcare is a very tricky sort of sector, and the on-ground knowledge really helped me sort of pivot into the startup phase of things. It can be very different as a sector from, let's say, fintech or SaaS, and that very specific knowledge helped me sort of make that jump. I don't know if I necessarily wanted to move to startups. I really loved my 9 to 6s, but I also equally loved my 9 to forever in the night. And I loved working across countries, of course, with all my startups. So I think that's sort of how I moved the needle. And again, for startups, I think you need to be very close to innovation. And that's always been a theme across, the work that I've been doing. And, it sort of helps you rapidly get to market that perhaps a large corporate will not let you achieve. And I think that sort of was my move there.
And you said about exits there as well, right? And one of the things I know you go into detail about is the all different exit options. There is so many founders listening, probably don't really understand really what an exit means for them and how to prepare for that. Could you talk through that as well? Like, how did you go about your exits?
So I think, these exits can be very tricky. Again, I think it's the constant battle between, do I sort of, go hard on technology and innovation and just sort of build that out? Or do I quickly bring the commercials in? Let's say, when you're looking at a seed stage, is when you have to start thinking as a scientist or, as an R&D person, you need to start sort of packaging that in. And that will eventually also give you that, thought process on where could be potential exits, let's say, 3 years down the line or 7 years down the line or 10 years down the line. There's nothing wrong in starting to think about that. And I think, it is imperative in this day and age where capital is very scarce, and you need to sort of know that these are all your possibilities. And typically in your, healthcare, health tech, biotech sort of stuff, you're looking at strategic exits. You're looking at, could it be a hospital chain? Could it be a pharmaceutical company? And again, with healthcare, I think exits come much sooner than you can expect. Of course, you can always build your product out to an IPO, and that's fantastic. But you always have the option of looking at, let's say, a Series B, can I exit out? And, these could be X number of, options that's there for me. And I think, that's sort of how you should, as a founder, keep that in mind.
How did you think about which option was best for you?
Oh, I think it's a number of different, I think you keep talking, you keep sort of looking at what would work well for the company, for you, for the investor who's invested in you for so long and have, your cap tables are split between all of these investors and yourselves and your founder if you have them, as well as the company, that sort of came in at the founding team, if you will. And I think all of these sort of it's a mix of what best would work from a number perspective, from a where did you see your innovation want to land, and how would, where the company is exited into, what are they doing with that product or that company beyond, if you sort of started out to make an impact in saving lives or in, reducing dollars in healthcare expenses. If you want to see that through, I think, those sort of levers sort of fall well in place in getting those exits out.
And you mentioned how, like, obviously with the experience you had in corporate beforehand, how do you think that made you more effective as a founder? Or like, what helped you and what hindered you by having that experience?
Oh, I'm a big fan of, founders in this sector to sort of have that, large corporate experience. And again, I think you can really crack on with how quickly you can move as a startup founder, just at how the generation is now versus, let's say, 15 years ago when I actually started my companies. And I think the large companies really bring that structure into place, the administrative effectiveness, as well as, who do you know in the commercial space that you can quickly get commercial traction with. And all that came through because of the large corporate, bandwidth that I had. I don't think I would say that there was anything hindering. It all sort of added into the startup path that I actually moved into. So all good things.
And you told me before as well how one of your investors was Excel, right?
Yeah.
How did that process work? Because obviously Excel is one of the most famous VCs of all of them. And to get them on your cap table was obviously a huge achievement at that point. So how did that process work on convincing them to invest?
It's a funny story. So Axel Partners obviously is one of the most, respected, regarded VCs in the world. And, I was right at the time when they were looking at how best do we sort of do the healthcare investment thesis in India. So it was really sort of very opportunistic. They knew me from before. And I actually got my funding of, a bunch of presentations, 63 versions, because Axel sent me back and I said, look, this is just not it. It was about across 2 rounds, 10 million. They really sort of put me through the ringer on what it was. But of course, a very different time than now when, it's you've got a lot of really good innovations coming in. You want to do your minimum viable product. Only then you get funded. But of course, I think it was fantastic to have them on our cap table. They were amazing in terms of connecting us with co-investors for future rounds. They gave us, again, a very US perspective as well, where Axel Partners had done a lot of big bets in the biotech space. And of course, my first startup was in oncology therapeutics, and the second one was in AI predictive in cancer. So really a fantastic experience all through. They were one of the best things that could have happened to us as a first-time founder.
And also raising that money, right? There's one thing about raising it, but it's also then how to use it effectively. So how did you use that funding? And how did you think about that process of, okay, we've got this funding, we've got this backing. How do you make the most of it and maximize our effectiveness?
So I think one more sort of good parts of having worked in organizations from before, we know how to make it very lean. So what we did really was, as a company, just as a strategy, what were the different modes and pivots that we could do while we were building our sort of the mainstream revenue generator? That was one. We invested heavily in commercial teams right up front. We had our scientific teams on board already, but kept them very lean. But we needed access to the market. So we invested heavily in, sales footprint in different countries, in the US, in India, and 7 or 8 different markets. I think that for us gave us a head start. We definitely kept our offices very, very, bare minimum. So basically lean was really the theme on how we would work through things.
And also expanding globally, right? That's one of the challenges for many people in health tech, because the UK is a very different system to other countries as well. So you mentioned one thing about having sales teams on the ground there. How else did you try to make sure that you had that path and that strategy to succeed in different countries?
Both the founders came in from very global sort of backgrounds. So we had our inroads into people who could expand the markets there. We had partners already sort of, right from the get-go, when we were actually licensing in novel molecules in oncology back in and doing the clinical trials, we already had our eyes and legs firmly out in different markets, because I think we wanted that head start. Now that worked really well for us, right? We were a very strong commercial organization, and I think a lot of founders today do miss that point. I think it can be a long runway when you're developing, let's say, a drug. Or something that's chopping down your drug discovery time by X, or your costs, and you can really get lost. A founder can really love their product, and I think you shouldn't be loving your product so much. I think you should be very practical about how can I make money off what I'm building. I think that if you have that sort of non-blinders on, I think you can really sort of make those monies come in over a period of time quite effectively.
What part of that founding journey did you first enjoy the most? But also, I guess, the opposite. Which is the part that you don't miss about being a founder?
It's an interesting question, because I think when you're a founder, you're sort of all hands on board. You're doing a bit of everything. I think at one point of time, I was serving tea as well, along with my meetings in R&D and raising monies. But I was recruiting people in different sort of functions and so on. So you're sort of it's very exhilarating, because you're doing so much. So it takes away a lot of your bandwidth, but it can also I think you always need to be able to step back ever so often and make sure you don't lose sight of what you started building and where you want to go, because you can really get lost in building your company out just from a human resource perspective, managing people. And I think managing people can be very tricky. I think the operational part of it can be very, very tricky when you're running companies. There are egos in play. There are, strategies that may go differently. There are, VCs that may come in and say, hey, you know what? It's lovely that you came up to this bit, but I would really like you to move to this bit. And you may not really like all of that. And I think that sort of temperance and patience to work through while keeping your core intact, I think is what is required when you're a founder.
And I guess on the ego point as well, right? Because that's something which in this space you sometimes have to deal with people with different egos. Have you got any tips for people right now who maybe are trying to deal with that process right now of trying to manage people with different amounts of pride or ego, but while also keeping them involved as a stakeholder?
Yeah, no, I think, I think founder personalities have got a lot to do with how well a company can come through the door eventually. Because it's a long haul. It's not, you don't have, in healthcare, it's not a 3-year or a 4-year exit. It is 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So you've got to sort of live with that, multiple sort of personalities that evolve as you build a company as well. But I would always say that know your founder really well before embarking on that journey, very well. And I don't mean to say, 10 weeks ago, you need to know that you're on the same tangent. You need to know that, there should be a lot of transparency around what you're building, what your opinions are, constant check-ins. There should be receptivity and, the sort of the fundamental, you should be receptive to feedback from your funders, your co-founder, your team, and be able to sort of balance that while at the same time also being a leader for the organization. I think that's sort of, a mix that works well.
You transitioned from being a founder more into the investment world as well. What was your motivation there?
So I think personally for me, it's, I've spent a lot of time in large corporates, so, and startups as a founder. And then I've always sort of, helped VCs along the way with their own portfolio companies. I've actually, helped startups raise up to about, $160 million when they flipped from India to the US and so on. So that journey has always been very interesting for me to work closely with in the investing world. And I think for me personally, as a 2-time founder, I think I wanted to sort of package all of my experience and have the ring side or the umbrella view of how could I nurture a startup the right way. Because, when you sort of have that discipline, the partnerships, who can actually startups go out to, and it made sense more for me from, do I work on a single product, or am I in a position now, 20 years into my career, to be able to sort of help, biotech firms or medtech or, life sciences or health tech go the extra mile. I think that's sort of very interesting and exciting for me to be able to work with founders and be able to invest in the right ones, because now I think you sort of, there's a very, it's almost very natural to have that, where is it going to trend? So I think, it's sort of a great place to be, especially in this ecosystem as well.
Hello. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I'm Amardeep Parmar, co-founder of BayHQ and the host of this show. For those of you who don't know, BayHQ is the community for high growth Asian heritage founders and investors in the UK. Over 7,500 people have attended our events, 200 people have been through our impact programs, and obviously there's been over 250 episodes of this podcast. If you want to join us and take part in the programs and come to the events, go to bayhq.com/join. We also just released our first ever book called Startups for Outsiders, which you can get on Amazon now, and the link is in the bio. Hope to see you soon at our event. Hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Is there anything, like any of your views that changed from being a founder and how you perceived investors to now that you're on the other side of the table, like, oh, okay, that's why these things work in the way they did? Have you found anything's changed about the way you perceive things?
I think I'm one of those people that's super empathetic with founders. I'm always putting, my feet in their shoes because of where I come from myself. And I think that only comes when you're a founder. And I think, the world is moving towards, the operator turned investor, I think is a very interesting sort of a theme that's sort of evolving, right? You're no longer, just an investment banker or a financier actually investing in you. So you've sort of got that scar tissue of, what might have burnt you in your, for example, I've known founders who've started companies bang in the middle of COVID. I was a founder, who started a company bang in the middle of COVID, and it was terrible. And I know that, there's significant investments that go in, but I also know the reasons why you had to shut down. So I think that sort of, and also, but of course, I don't think being in the investor space is all that it's made out to be. It's fundraising is hard, but I think it's a handshake that works really well when you're in I think as an operator, when you become an investor. And I hope for, to see actually more fund managers in this space sort of take that on.
And you also work with universities, right? And spin outs from universities. Can you tell us about what you do there?
Yeah, so I'm an alumnus of London Business School, and I actually sit on their private capital committee as well. So I'm an entrepreneur mentor in residence, which means that we have, I think the university ecosystem is one of the best in the world. If Boston is the hub for, let's say, biotech and so on, I think our university ecosystem is brilliant. There's just such fantastic technological innovations coming in. So what happens typically is, in my position, I actually mentor a lot of pre-seed stage startups that have very strong technology seeds in them, from the Oxfords and the Cambridges and Francis Crick and UCL and LBS. And I then look at how best can we look at commercializing and go to market for these companies and help them with fundraising along the way.
And like, obviously, there's going to be people listening right now, right, at that stage. Maybe they have a technology, but they're a bit stuck on the commercialization aspect. And I think one of the interesting about biotech and medtech is that sometimes what happens is that, like, for a traditional startup, for a tech startup, you say, like, find the problem, then find the solution. But sometimes in biotech, you might find the solution, then work out, okay, how do I now commercialize this? And have to work almost backwards, right? It's like you have the science, you have some kind of innovation. And how do you go about thinking about that? How do you go, okay, we can do this cool thing now. How do we then make this into a product or make it commercially viable?
I think in biotech, especially, so I think, with health tech and med tech, you feel there's almost, I think there's a way to look at what the gaps are in the market, and then you could build products towards that. But I think in biotech, it's always science leading, instead of the commercial or the gaps, right? I mean, you do need to know where your defensibility strategies are. Otherwise, you in this day and age, I think it's so hard when there's so many startups coming in. So if you have really strong IP roots that you can make out of your science that you're developing, or your, it sort of then moves into the whole, how can I then commercialize this about 3 years into the preclinical is done, and then how do we sort of, open that out from a commercial space? I think it works a little differently across both these sectors.
And when people are thinking about that, because one challenge I have, so for example, somebody interviewed yesterday, they are like 8 years into their startup now, but the science is still being proven. And that's obviously a very different mindset, like you said, to say a B2B SaaS, where it's like, okay, we can get this up and let's sell it in 2 years. Do you have any tips for people on that longer journey where they can't necessarily flip it, they can't grow very quickly right to begin with? How do they keep going and keep that faith in what they're building?
I think in a sense, I almost feel like, it's you'll see a lot of really good biotech founders coming in as PhDs. And I think they've already sort of mastered that art of doing the long haul education, and they know what it takes to sort of be very gritty and stick on with what it's a lot of passion for the science that it's developing. It's a very different sort of strain of DNA, if you will. But I also think, what makes them work more efficiently is to get a set of advisors that are very strong commercially in the markets that they want to have their footprint in, and help them build out their markets a lot better right from the get-go, right? I mean, you can always get in your commercial, like you said, right? It takes 7-8 years to do your clinical trials and get those approvals, and most of them fail, along the way. So it's sort of, you build your moats with the 2, 3, 4 different assets, and then you possibly are successful with one, but definitely sort of the advisory board right off the bat, and then a good view on not being too tied in with your science, and having that, how can we commercialize it? And the end goal, I think, is very, very sort of, necessary. And of course, fundraising, I think, is much harder for biotech firms, because also there's, VCs, they're long profit cycles. They're long, there's a lot of patience that's required. But these are the products that will have impact. These are the products that's true innovation, right?
And when you are assessing founders of that kind, right, it is different to maybe assessing founders of other backgrounds. What do you look for in those founders at the very early stage to be like, okay, this is somebody who I think can pull this through, and then it's worth investing in that really long-term vision with them?
It's okay. So it's in very scientific founders, you're looking at, these sort of early stage assets with a lot of grants. And then you move into actually getting the VC funding, right? You're not really, they need, larger sized funds coming in. So you can't really, your B2B SaaS, it's just a few $100,000 is not enough when you're building these companies. So when these founders actually come in and they're already well granted, a few million in, they already have the monetary capability to be able to prove a few, milestones just in the clinical setup, get a few IPs in. I think that's when, for me, it becomes interesting to invest in and sort of stick in for that long haul. It's a very different temperament than the earlier exit. I think for me, that's what works. And I think I keep repeating this, but if you are a science founder, if you have that appetite already to say that I know the commercial routes and you're already thinking about it, I think it's very compelling for me to say that this is someone who knows how to hold that company down for the next 10 years. And then
with the less scientific companies, right? So the more health tech, I guess, companies, it's one of the things I've always learned about in the last couple of years too, about how the companies in the health space are slightly different words used for different ones of them, right? But when it is maybe they do have a quicker cycle and it is trying to fill a gap or a problem, how do you assess those companies? And when you're looking at, is this a good investment? What are you looking for there?
So I think, with companies that are more, let's say, so health tech, and it can be B2B as well as B2C, right? It depends on which market you're in. And I think, there's obviously we have a lot of traction in the AI space. You have a lot of traction in the wearable space. And I think you need to sort of break through that clutter, because it can be very risky investments. I think the last 4 years of where AI, for example, came in, I think there were a lot of rapid tech, and you could get very excited by it. But I think healthcare is a very, very complex topic in that I don't think you can replace doctors. You can only assist them in what they're doing. And of course, AI is doing wonderfully well. But I do think the next 4 years and so on is where you'll see true innovation coming in. And again, infrastructure or better, faster diagnoses or more accurate diagnoses, precision diagnostics, preventative healthcare, personalization of medicines and healthcare. These are all great topics to sort of follow through. I think consumables can be very tricky. When it's consumer healthcare, I think it's of course, it's easy to understand. You want them, but the journey is very hard from a marketing perspective. There's a lot of marketing spends that come in with this kind of product. So there, it can be you need to be a little cautious about what you're investing in. But I think these are sort of pillars to where I'd look at in terms of my likes in investment there.
And if for the founders listening who potentially might be pitching you someday, what advice would you give them? What should they make sure that they get across to you?
A founding team that's really talking well to each other, a strong sort of set of strategies in place with defensibility of their product. Definitely sort of, what am I seeing in terms of the market fit, or, mapped it back with, good numbers, right? I'm a very data oriented person. So for me, I need backing of everything that you're building. I would need strong foundations that say this is why this makes sense. This is why a certain number of patients would want my product, or I think I need that data backup there. And I think, these are sort of the, main cruxes. And a well thought out business model is very important. It's, you need to have your plan A's, plan B's, and plan C's always in place.
Is there any right now, right, with the health industry? Because obviously, like you're saying, how you've been multiple events today, and there's all these conferences to do with health tech and healthcare. Is there a way you think maybe that your views maybe swim against the tide, where you think the industry is moving in one direction, or if you think something's going to happen, and maybe you have a different opinion to that?
No, absolutely. And I think it's always, I think that's the interesting part, right? I mean, you never know. There's so many, say, missed bets that VCs have not made because there's someone in the team said that we don't think this is what it is. But, you could have a genomics expert come in and say that this is where, I think the next 10 years is going to see the wave off. And, you just have to make that call based on the market knowledge that you have, based on, I think, keeping your ear to the ground is very, very important. Consumers at the end of the day, and I don't mean patients only, I think I also mean, manufacturers. I mean to say pharmaceutical companies. What are their gaps? If you have that sort of information come in, you're in a much better position to guide a founder in what they're building.
With like the aspect of AI, right? So you were saying about how doctors are always going to be needed and like AI can assist them. How is it disrupting what you've been working on, right? Because obviously you've been in health tech from before AI was cool, and just like a startup was in the AI space. How has it been disruptive to the way you thought about things and maybe what you thought the future might hold?
So look, I think, I had my second company was, in AI, in predictive cancer. And I think it was a time when I was building something when there was no expertise on the ground, right? In particular with AI and healthcare. And I think now it's reached a stage where it's a lot of saturation, but saturation not of the right kind. It's saturation of we can make anything faster, anything more efficient, but all it's doing is just a one-up of what's already there. It's just wrapper tech. What we're really looking for is how can I, reduce my time in drug discovery? How can I detect toxicity in X number of ways and percentages or so on, right? And I think doctors are very wary of in different geographies, right? You could have, if it's a private market and it's not a reimbursement market, they have a very different stance to it. If it's something that comes in, let's say with the NHS, you're looking at, sort of shortening wait times, for example, right? You're lessening the burden of what's not there. So I think there's different ways of looking at things in different markets and different geographies. But definitely sort of, I think AI in, like I mentioned, right, in precision diagnostics or moving into the preventative care of things, these are all very exciting curves to be in. And I think the next 4 to 5 years, it'll reveal itself on how those investments sort of pan out. In fact, a very interesting sort of number that I was just looking over is in the entire AI deep tech investment, health AI is what is leading the pack, even versus the other sectors, which I think is exciting, but also I think, need to be sort of guardedly watched because there's just so much going on with AI in other sectors, right? It's a tad scary almost.
You mentioned too about how the UK has got a really good university ecosystem. For like health founders who are considering, do I build here? Do I build in Dubai? Do I build in the US? Where do I build? What makes you think that the UK is a good place to build and where can it improve?
I think with healthcare, I think the tech is brilliant just from the talent that it has out of here. I definitely think that the US is also a good place to scale, Series A, Series B, when, again, but of course, you're always sort of looking at what are the regulatory challenges for me. The Europe and UK have very different ones. US is very different. So where's the support I get from both, let's say, strategic partnerships or clinical trial sites, or is an FDA sort of moving me quicker? I think these all sort of come into play. Now, these are also very specific to the disease type. So if I have a chronic cancer, segment, then I'm obviously looking at a geography where the incidence numbers are very high, right? Or the paying capability is high. So the access to the market and so on. So India, for example, right, it does a lot of fantastic work on development. So you can really get your technology or science clinical trials done very cost effectively, and then launch them into sort of bigger markets as well. So I think it's a mix of what the C segment you are, the payability, and also the fundability that all go into play.
So let's go for the quick fire questions. So first one is, who are 3 Asians in Britain you think are doing incredible work and you'd love to shout them out?
Dr. Nadine, the founder of Proximi, is someone who's done some fantastic work on, the surgical operating side of things. I think she's one to sort of watch. Ahuti Rai is a friend and someone that I adore. She's a thought leader in the mental health space. She's a venture partner, and she's absolutely brilliant. She runs as well on the health community as well. So she's brilliant. And then we, of course, have a friend as well, Devika Wood. She's the CEO of Brain Plus, and she's also co-founded Wealth, which is the women in health community, which is fantastic, gives a lot of legs to the women founders and investors in the healthcare community, coming in from a very vulnerable side of things, right? The human side of things. I think she's really doing some fantastic things in the UK with both of that.
And what we're doing now is we're 260 something episodes in. So what we're saying to people is you can come back on in 2 years' time. What would you love to come back in 2 years' time and say, this is what you've done in that 2 years?
I'd love to see where the investments have taken me from today to, I'd love to see if we can move the needle on women founders being invested in, less than 5%. And I want to see if I can personally make a mark in moving that needle up, not just, women founders, but also really sort of seeing it through, giving them that support of, just traction in different markets and so on. That would be very interesting to see.
And if people want to find out more about you and what you're up to, where should they go to?
Oh, LinkedIn. Very active on LinkedIn. I'm speaking at a lot of events. Come by. I have a lot of thoughts on healthcare and investing and, investing in women. And I think, this is how you can get in touch with me. And I'd love to sort of chat about anything that you do in, healthcare, health tech, biotech, the whole 9 yards.
And is there anything that the audience listening today might be able to help you with?
Interesting. So obviously, I think, it's I'd love to sort of see how operators tend to view the whole investor community and how they can help back the what it can be a struggle for founders in this climate to get any responses from investors, right? I try and my best to respond to everyone, but I'd love to see if there's that sort of the feedback on what their tough spots could be that we could come in and fill the gap on. Of course, there's fantastic sets of conferences and forums and, events that you keep getting invited into. And I keep seeing this community everywhere in London, and it's brilliant. So that dialogue is always on. I think more of that.